Hey everyone, this time we read Playing at the Next Level by Ken Horowitz. So this book covers the history of Sega of America. It does overlap a little bit with Sega of Japan, and it goes into some of the third parties that worked with Sega at the time, but it's a really interesting read, and it kind of, changed my thinking a little bit, and not just thinking that Sega of Japan was really dysfunctional, but all of Sega was dysfunctional. That's just kind of the feeling I got from reading this. The book really isn't laid out in a great way. It does kind of flow chronologically, but it's it's a little weird. It'll jump around a lot. So you'll start off with like one story, and then that will go to kind of like the conclusion of that story where, say, it follows like the history of one of the video games, or it covers the history of like the Joe Montana football games. And so it'll go to that one's conclusion in like the mid 90s, then it'll jump back to another story that starts back in like 1989. And it just keeps skipping around like that, or at least it feels like it's skipping around. For some of the stories, it does kind of work pretty well because you don't want to. I could see how you wouldn't want to leave a story, say Joe Montana football. You wouldn't really want to leave that at the first game. You might want to tell the entire story of that series. But it just kind of felt a little odd to me. I don't know. It just it just read kind of weird for me, to be honest. There are a few things I didn't know about Sega of America in here, which I thought was really interesting, and again tells like a fuller picture of Sega. And that's just how Sega kept opening and shutting Sega of America down. Like, they did it with the Master System until they got their deal with Tonka, then they shut down Sega of America. And then when their deal with Tonka kind of reached its conclusion for the Master System, they decided to start up Sega of America again. And I just get the feeling that if they had stuck with it, they might have been further along by the time they got to the Genesis, instead of just, these constant stop-starts. It just doesn't make a lot of sense from either like a business standpoint or from really just trying to get your video games out there. I think Ken does a really good job of gathering together all the stories of the people involved and explaining them and kind of why certain games didn't work out or why games had to be moved to like different development teams over time. It's a really great resource to go through all of this. I really enjoyed that part of the book, even if there are other things that I didn't like too much about it. It seems like there are just a whole lot of egos involved in Sega, and they just never really seem to like be able to work together for an extended period of time. You look at Sega Technical Institute, where it was designed to have the Japanese and the American programmers working together, where you have the Japanese programmers kind of mentoring the American programmers, especially since a lot of the American programmers were younger at the time, so they kind of needed some kind of a mentorship. So that was a good idea, but it doesn't sound like it really worked out that way because the Japanese developers kind of moved to their own little section, and the Americans did the same thing. So it just feels like there were too many egos, and nobody could just get over their ego to work together to make this thing work. One thing from this, you just get a lot more examples of how smaller companies get bought by a bigger one, and then those smaller companies just get run into the ground. It's not just an EA problem, it's everybody. Like, everyone seems to do this to these smaller companies. I don't know what it is, like whether they think they need to adjust to a more corporate atmosphere instead of like sort of the more freewheeling, independent scene. But you see it a lot in this book. It's just kind of sad where you have one person's company get bought by Sega, and then they immediately regret the decision and try to find a way out, and they just end up going away in like another 5 or 6 years. It's kind of sad to read about these things. Reading about this stuff like kind of made me think about growing up, how I never really thought about about a second or third party developer. I would just see like a Nintendo cartridge and I would think, oh, Nintendo made that. Or I would see the Sega Genesis or a Sega Genesis cartridge and I would think, oh, Sega made that game. It was like there are two faceless wizards out there just making games, and I was just none the wiser because I'm just like a dumb kid, like between the ages of 6 and 14 at the time. Probably my biggest takeaway from this is how a lot of these people tried to fight through the dysfunction of Sega and the whole corporate structure. Especially with like Sonic Extreme, where they just had a lot of development issues. They tried to use the Nights into Dreams engine, and then Naka just decided that, I made the engine so you can't use it without asking me. It's just so weird where they would get an ego involved in that, and it's just like, just let them make the damn game. Like, who cares about, the engine or anything like that? Just let them use it. Like, God, there are so many things that seem to get in the way of people making games for Sega. So as I mentioned, this book kind of changed my view of Sega. Not really as a whole. I still love the Sega Genesis. It is my favorite retro console. But the company just... It's almost like reading this, I'm not surprised that they failed. It's especially as many times as they did. They really only had like the Sega Genesis and the Dreamcast as big hits, and as much as I did like the Saturn when I had it for a little bit, it couldn't compete with the PlayStation, and it couldn't compete with the N64, and it's just kind of sad that Sega never really got their act together for more than those two systems, and by the time the Dreamcast came out, it was kind of already a little bit too late for Sega. So anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everybody.